Thank you, Professor Bedford. I'd now like to introduce Marcus Beveridge. Marcus is a lawyer, and he is the principal and owner of Queen City Law. His main areas of practice are across a wide spectrum of industry groups. Marcus' clients are active in the wide range of business pursuits, which include international aviation, manufacturing, banking, finance, employment recruitment, early childhood education, car parking, house construction and sales, land development, subdivisions, hotel ownership, a very, very broad spectrum. Now, Marcus is quite unique in as much that he does speak Indonesian, and over the past few years, Marcus and some of his team have actually been very busy in the property development sector and have acted on some of the biggest high-rise property developments in New Zealand has ever seen. Capital expenditure on these projects is in the vicinity of New Zealand $1 billion. Marcus is also considered one of New Zealand's key leading successful immigration lawyers. Over to you.
And the most important thing is that I used to be chairman of NZAMI many years ago, so between Bill and Bernard, I think. But listen, just a couple of things. Professor Bedford's speech, I thought that was really interesting. Citizenship, my own view is that after getting residency, having to wait for 5 years shows an absolute lack of confidence in our country in these days of globalisation. All of us will remember when you could be on a work visa, get your residency under general skills or whatever, and get your citizenship shortly thereafter. So that's my view on that one. And one comment on Sky City. We have been lawyers for Sky City on some issues. In fact, Bradley got one of their senior executives a work visa in one day, and they have a very special relationship with INZ as the biggest employer of people in Auckland City. The thing about the whale gamblers, which they're targeting from Asia, is that they'll come down to Sydney typically. If they're having a bad run on the baccarat tables, they want to be able to get over to New Zealand quickly. They can basically go from, say, Sydney to Melbourne or to the Gold Coast or to Perth, or they can come to New Zealand if they're losing. And, you know, some of these guys will be dropping $5–10 million. It's a lot of dough, and we want it. And the problem is, of course, given that most of them are Chinese, is they have to apply for a visa, and they don't really want to wait for a week or so to get their visitor's visa out of Sydney, out of INZ in Sydney. So that's what that's about. How the media deals with it is different, and we probably all have views on that. In terms of Christchurch, no doubt, Tuariki under the Fair Trading Agreement wanted to import 5,000 blue-collar Chinese workers to live in car crates. Yeah, to do all the blue-collar work, and that is, I'd probably be with you on that one. But in terms of our law firm, I speak Indonesian. I was an exchange student there. I applied to go to Switzerland when I was 17. I grew up in Nelson, and they sent me off to Indonesia, which was a bit of a culture shock for me. It was actually more of a culture shock coming back to New Zealand. Bradley, who's one of our lawyers who does most of our immigration work, he speaks Tagalog, and in my office we have Cantonese Mandarin, Korean-speaking lawyers, and also some pretty lousy Spanish speakers and French speakers. But we have a lot to do with Asia in terms of our practice. Bradley, aside from being a Filipino by birth, is also in the New Zealand kickboxing team, so we use him for our debt recovery a lot. He's very useful. And the demographics, it sounds like in 50 years, will all look different. So I note also we've got the ANZ Bank here, and in terms of the economics driving some of these issues, ANZ, of course, is miles in front of all the other banks in Asia with a banking license in China, so you've got a really good sponsor there. So I'll let Bradley power through our PowerPoint now, and then I'll pop back in on some property-related issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for that kind introduction. Luckily, I haven't had to use kickboxing skills to recover even any of our fees, so that's a good sign. I know we're a bit short on time, so I'm going to power through all the PowerPoints so we can just chug along, especially it's Friday as well. Okay. So essentially today, I just want to talk about the main topic, which is migration from Asia, the issues and challenges, and I'm going to specifically talk about the investor category. The first part is just I'm going to go through the introduction, bit of background, essentially why it's such a big thing, and then we'll have a chat about the trends under the investor category in recent years. And then Marcus will come in quickly. When I say quickly, hopefully that's within 20 minutes. And talk about the intersection with economic development. And then we'll run through a bit of a practical side of life and chug along with a case study. So hopefully you guys are still all awake by that time, and we'll be able to come through with some of your comments and good discussions on that. And finally, we'll look at whether the current policy at the moment as it stands, whether it's right in terms of being able to accommodate for the migrants from Asia. And then possibly, if we still have time, look at giving a proposal to the business migration branch. So Professor Bedford has clearly indicated to us that, look, the Asian migration is here, and it's going to be a contribution to New Zealand, and we need to be in the right time and right place and to be able to capture the opportunities presented in Asia. So that's pretty clear cut. And most of the options available to them when they're coming here are the skilled migrant category, the long-term business visa, and the investor category. But today, I'm just going to focus on the investor category. And the reason being is that since its inception on around 2009, the Investor 2 category and the Investor Plus, the main issue that's been plaguing us is how do we get the money from China to New Zealand that's compliant with the policy given the banking system requirement. And finally, after a long time, the Business Migration Branch, or the Research and Policy Team, is actually looking to review that. And Marcus and I have had a chance to have a quick chat with the senior analysts yesterday regarding some of their thoughts and some of the issues that they're looking into early next year. So today, my main objective is to get your input. So today, we can provide possibly some recommendations in terms of the changes that Immigration New Zealand should consider with regards to the investor policy. Right. So Professor Bedford has also outlined in terms of the trends under the investor category. As you can see, since its inception, there's a substantial investment that's already come through. It's 1.2 billion. But the number of applicants is only 167 now. The cap is 300. That's not even half. So in terms of the capital value that's coming in, it is quite substantial, but as Professor Bedford said, there's not enough people coming in under the investor category. It's less than 50% of what the cap is supposed to be. And if you look at the top 3 nationalities that are currently applying, you see US as number 1, second Great Britain, and thirdly China. And it's only 39 people, and there's what, 1 billion people in China? So we're saying we're probably not capturing enough. And a bit of comparison, in 2001 there was 1,088 applicants. In 2002 there's 1,087, 2006 39, and since its inception it's 167. So you can see there's a lot of improvement that we can do in terms of the current policy. And in terms of the capital value, it's not that much change since 2001 and 2002, but the difference is in 2001 there's 1.1 billion, 2002 1.2 billion, but since 2009 we've only got 1.2 billion. Right. So Marcus, I'd like to invite you to have a quick chat.
So one thing we were talking about there, actually Bradley, yesterday we had David, the senior policy analyst out of INZ, who's reviewing the investor and business categories, first review since 2008. He's actually said that he's going to be speaking to you directly anyway, so I assume that you all know about that. He said that in 6 months or so they may or may not tweak the policy. He certainly didn't indicate any revolutionary changes, and personally, I'm not too excited about it. I'm actually quite upset about it because we just if you sort of go back to the comments the Professor made about the timing of the investor categories, all of us would have been very active around 2000, 2001, 2002 with those investor cases in those days. And since then, of course, with America being pretty much bankrupt, they have leapt into the space. They have policies called EB5 policies where the people that we were aligned with in China pretty much dumped us immediately when we brought in the English language requirements and took a forensic accounting approach to how the Chinese get their money out of China into Hong Kong and so on. And I was given some examples of this last week with a woman who we used to work with who has now acted for 1,000 Chinese going into the USA getting green cards by investing $500,000 US, and they have not had to speak English. They have taken a very laissez-faire approach to tax matters, and they simply don't care very much how they get their money into the States. So that door there has been really, really wide open. There's a thing in that EB5 policy called a regional component of it, but believe it or not, in downtown LA, the new Marriott Hotel is being built by way of 200 Chinese investors under this EB5 policy who have all invested $500,000 US each with very little strings attached. So, and they had to have 1.5 times the rate of unemployment to be eligible under that category, and because of problems in LA, I guess economically, they've qualified. And the woman from Guangzhou that we've worked with in that space has said the Americans are now looking at slowing that policy down a bit because I think it's based on 10,000 applicants a year. So, a huge amount of Chinese money has poured into the States under these sort of categories where we've got a handful really. But these policy settings, I know some of you were involved years ago when we sat down with the policy analyst from INZ with Aussie. There was Aussie there and a few others, and I had a sort of a physical fight with the policy analyst from INZ, or it almost was, because in terms of the definition of residential property under the Building Act 2004, and because of the then Prime Minister's views on not having big residential homes in Howick, high-rise development in the city was pretty much thrown out, baby with the bathwater. So if you look at the policy settings now, it says costs associated with obtaining any regulatory approval is not part of a principal applicant's acceptable investment. I mean, this is just plain daft, absolutely daft. And as I said, it was driven by the Prime Minister at that time's desire not to have big homes in Howick, and I'm not really joking about that. So when we look at the Auckland Council's spatial and unitary plan and the Council's requirements to build a lot more sort of high-density residential apartments in the city, under that definition, none of these projects would qualify under the existing definition of acceptable investment, which is entirely counterintuitive if you think about it. An example for us is a development site across the road from our office, which is where that reverse bungee jump site is. That was purchased by an immigrant. It was actually purchased off Chinese Indonesians by a Korean and has recently been sold to a Chinese immigrant from Shanghai for $53 million. His 10 million was included in the acquisition price of that land, but that is a 92,000 square metre, 67 level high rise, which is going to provide, well, was designed to provide executive accommodation and residential accommodation. And under the current policy, or should I say instruction settings, it doesn't work. So it won't be a complying investment, which is really stupid because what we're talking about there is 42 months of construction, about 300,000 manpower hours, jobs for the construction sector for 500 men for 42 months. And it's plain nuts, the existing definition. And the same thing will apply to a lot of the other residential property development. What I'm getting at there, just so you understand what I'm talking about, is when you build something new, one must get a resource consent, one must get a building consent. On big projects, it requires architects, town planners, urban designers, traffic engineers, preferred contractors, and it creates a lot of jobs. And at the moment, our policy setting is entirely wrong. But having spoken to the guy who is charged with reviewing the business categories for the government yesterday, a nice chap, but I certainly wasn't inspired. And in 6 months there may or may not be some tweaks to what we have. Whether this is because Winston is alive again, or whether this is because our government at the moment is bereft of policy, or cannot think creatively, or like in Auckland at the moment, there's they're trying to raise money for infrastructure projects. So there's a huge opportunity to exploit the existing landscape, which we're just not doing at all. And then the other question is, do we want to be tenants in our own country as well? So it's not easy, and there's also a regional perception that wealthy Chinese can buy New Zealand residency. So there's a bit to go into the mix, but we haven't got it right at the moment. I think that's about all I'm going to say, Brad, so I'll throw it back at you.
So let's get back into topic. All right, so let's run through a case study. Let's say you have a client, calls you, had a meeting with him, got through the following facts. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at all of it. Essentially, the background or the facts that you gathered from the client meeting or from the email that you received is, you got a couple who are Chinese nationals, age 45, both have 10 years business experience as a dentist, both operate their own business as a sole trader, each have their own staff, at least 5 employees each. They meet the English requirement, IELTS 5.5. Then you asked about where their money is, or whether they have enough money to comply with the Investor 2 category. They give you, well, the settlement funds, they have an office, but it's under the husband's name, and it's valued at around $500,000. And the wife has an apartment, and it's also valued at $500,000. And then you also ask them about the investment funds that they have. They got bank deposits. It's under the husband's name at $500,000 as well. And a bank deposit in China is valued at $500,000 under the wife's name, and shares for about $500,000 under the husband's name. First question is, does this meet the Investor 2 category? No? Why not?
The investment would be likely, I think it needs to be joint names.
Correct. Any other issues that you can think of? Yes? Transfer of funds, okay. So at the moment, if they're from China, what is the accepted way of transferring the funds? TT? Even though there's a restriction of $50,000 per person? So how do you transfer $50,000, $1.5 million in a span of 1 year or 6 months? All right. So we did talk about this with the business analyst, or senior analyst yesterday. And at the moment, what they're doing is, if the applicant has foreign currency, so if, let's say, if they already have USD dollars in their account, what they would do is they can transfer 50,000 per day until they reach 1.5. So that would mean they would transfer $50,000, 50,000 New Zealand USD dollars per day for a month. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is through what he advises. If they have a business and that business has approval in terms of the foreign currency regime in China, or if they have funds outside of China already. So those are the 3 main options for them available. Now the problem that I see with that particular approach is you've just limited your pool of target market that could potentially qualify, but just because of the restriction that we have currently, you pretty much cut them out of the picture. So that's one of the main issue there. And yes, you're correct in also outlining the fact that it is, they won't be able to claim for the amount of money that the secondary applicant has under the under their name. So is there a particular solution that you would recommend to the client? What's the way to overcome that? Go to America.
One of the parties kills the other. And they inherit.
That's one of them? Oh, well, sorry? Go to America or Canada or Australia. One way that I've kind of discussed this, because I had a similar client and similar issue with one of my clients anyway. What the business migration manager advised is that if you've set up a joint account in New Zealand and they transfer the money from China to New Zealand and put that in the joint account in New Zealand. Now the problem is there might be tax implications in China and gifting. For example, if they're in Japan, the tax implication is quite serious. It's like 50%. So it's not really ideal. And most of the time, it's common practice that, especially in Asian culture anyway, that you won't have joint ownership. So those are some of the things that I'm hoping that this particular case study is outlined. Okay. Now, in terms of the practical side of life, when you've assessed, you've outlined the issues, and you've happened to given a proposal that will allow them to satisfy the Investor 2 category, when you're looking at the expression of interest, in terms of the supporting documents, maybe we can break down what the requirements are and possibly look at what supporting documents you would need to attach in the application at a later period if it gets approved in principle. So first thing is business experience. Everybody knows what the definition is. What type of supporting documents would be ideal in this situation, even though it's a sole trader? No? Okay. Sorry? Yeah, financial statement, tax record, employment agreements. Those are some of the things that might be hard to find in Asia, though. And I'm sure you guys would have probably run across those issues as well. Okay. So essentially, from this case study, the thing that I really wanted to highlight is the main issues with the current policy at the moment is that it doesn't accommodate for the joint ownership. That's one particular issue, and also obviously the transfer of funds that it has to go through the banking system. Okay. Now, after my discussion with the senior case manager yesterday, they advised that some of the guidelines that they're looking for in terms of considering a recommendation from us, they've kind of, 4 minutes, okay, right. So let's have a look at some of the factors that you want to think about when you're proposing a recommendation to Immigration New Zealand. One is it will encourage an enterprise and innovation. It will be invested in areas where it will contribute to the economic growth of New Zealand. There should be a mechanism in place to ensure that the investment funds were earned or acquired lawfully. The migrants that are attracted will be able to contribute to New Zealand and further establish external links with New Zealand. The requirements are in line with other jurisdictions and will provide New Zealand with a competitive advantage against other countries. So I guess given the short time frame, if you do have any ideas, I'd be more than happy to discuss with you, or if we do have time in the panel, I'd be more than happy to have a quick discussion. Thank you.